Alright, it's time to put together our Kismet demonstration, and we're going to be taking this a piece at a time, starting with our door. Now the door setup I'm going to use is very similar, though just a tiny little bit different, than the door setup that was created in our simple level demonstration. So if you already saw that and you already have something similar set up on your end, and you'd like to skip this video, then you're more than welcome. However, if you don't have it, here's what we've got. We've got a gate which is waiting to be slid off to the side when the player approaches it. That's really all we're going for. But let's talk about the gate itself. First off, this is not a static mesh. If we right-click and find it in the content browser, this is the static mesh SHU Deco SM Chainlink 02B. So technically, the object itself is a static mesh, but it was not added to the level as one. We did not just drag and drop this out of the content browser. What I did is I right-clicked here on the floor, chose Add Actor, and went all the way up to Interp Actor. That means this is a dynamic object which is ready to interpolate in some way. In our particular case, it's going to move. So make sure you choose that. Now, once you do that, you'll get a gate very similar to what I have here, but it'll have one unique problem in that by default it will not block the player. Player can run right through it as if it were a hologram or if it didn't exist at all. To fix that, you need to select the object you bring in, whatever your interp actor is, press F4 to open up its properties, then expand collision, and set your collision type to collide block all. Because by default, it's going to be at no collision, which means your gate will be useless. So we'll leave that at block all. I'm going to close out my properties. Now, I'm going to try to keep this fairly Kismet-centric, which is why we didn't take the time to add that here. But I did want to go over and just so you could see any of the pertinent features of the mesh itself. Now, we need an object which is listening out for when the player gets within proximity of the gate. To do this, we're going to use a trigger. In fact, we're going to use a lot of triggers in this level. I'm going to right-click here on the floor, choose Add Actor, and Trigger is always available inside this menu, so just click Add Trigger. We're going to get this guy positioned right in the center of the gate, so right in the middle of the chain link, and then we'll center it up in kind of the left to right of the door as well. Now, I'm going to tap the C key. This actually activates your collisions in your level. You can see all those great collision surfaces. But it also shows you the collision radius of our trigger. Now this is the radius, kind of the volume space within which the player is going to need to be standing in order to activate this trigger, for the trigger to know, hey, you're standing close enough for me to do something. Now to change this, to make it a little bigger, because right now it's kind of small, I'm going to press F4 to open up the properties for the trigger. We'll expand trigger, expand cylinder component, and then expand cylinder component again. And you'll see collision radius currently set to 40, which is a little low. I'm going to crank this up to 128. And just for the fun of it, I'm going to take the collision height and crank it up to 80 just to be kind of careful. Let's close out the trigger properties, and I'll slide this up into the air so that the bottom of that cylinder sets pretty much on the ground. This doesn't really need to be all that exact, though. Okay, so now there's plenty of space for the player to be standing within this volume. Now all we need to do is use Kismet to wire this trigger up to our interp actor to cause the interp actor to move. Now, I'm going to tap C to put our collisions away, and let's open up the Kismet editor. I'm going to do this by clicking the Open Unreal Kismet button, located up here about halfway through the main toolbar. If ever, during these videos, you just see the Kismet editor magically seem to appear like this, it's probably because I really quickly went up and clicked on that button and just didn't think to say it out loud. Generally, I don't do that, but I thought I would warn you. If you ever see this window just kind of pop into existence, don't be alarmed. All I did was click on that button. Now, personally, I think that the Kismet user interface is so simple that you'll probably just get it right away, and anything that you don't understand right off the bat, you'll probably get as you start to use Kismet for a few minutes. But this is a really general overview of the simplistic UI. First off, you have your main sequence area, which is this great big gray window which kind of dominates the editor. There's a menu bar, which allows you to show and hide the properties area down in the lower left, and the sequences area in the lower right. Now, the sequences area right now isn't going to do much for us. We'll actually talk about that just a little bit later. It's right now, it's not going to be particularly useful, but we'll leave it up anyway. Now, next to this, we have a toolbar with just a series of buttons. We have Open Parent Sequence. This is something we'll see a little bit later, but as we create these networks of sequence objects that are all wired together and have all this great stuff that kind of flows around and looks really cool, we can collapse all of that down into a subsequence. It's kind of like closing it into a folder. I don't know if any of you have ever used Photoshop, but Photoshop allows you to take several different layers and put them into a folder called a group, and this is a very similar thing. We can take an entire sequence, a very complex sequence, and essentially crush it down into a single sequence object. So it all kind of becomes like one node. And then we can step down into that node, into that sequence, to make changes. This button allows us to step back up again. And that's something we'll take a look at a little bit later. We can rename any sequence that we like, and that's only for the actual collapsing sequences that we make. So if we take a great big network and collapse it down to a single node, we can rename that node. We have zoom to fit. As we start to fill this area up with a whole bunch of nodes, you'll find yourself having to navigate around this window a lot. And so zoom to fit will just kind of tuck everything into the window for you. We have show and hide our unused connectors. This will become more important when you're wrapping up, really. We can toggle curved connections. Now, I'm going to demonstrate this real quick, just with some junk nodes. So I'm going to go to New Event, and I don't even really care who I grab. We'll just grab Anim Notify, because it's the first one I saw. And I'm going to right-click and grab a new action, and we'll just grab Actor Factory, because it's the first one I saw. And I'm just going to drag a wire out of the output into Enable. Now, this network I just built does nothing, okay? It's just here for the purposes of example. So we have toggle curved connections. If I switch this on and off, we go from a straight line, which you can see here, to a curved line. Wow, so it's just whichever one you like. Now, I think the curved lines look pretty cool. They make me happy, so generally I leave it on curved lines. Now, we can create a new sequence object by clicking the little light bulb button here. Generally, I right-click, and you get a nice sub-menu system, so you know if you want an event or an action or a condition or a variable, and you can choose all of those right here. However, you can also click on the new button. And in this case, you kind of have to know what it is you want to create. So if we want to create an actor factory, which is what I created a second ago, I can type actor and press enter. Now here's all of the different sequence objects which have the word actor inside them. So it's just kind of a way, if you already know what you want to create, to jump in and quickly find it. Now if you don't know what you want to create, again, this is just personal preference, I find that the right mouse button is a little more useful because you can kind of start off by going, all right, well, I know it's not an event because this is something that is not going to be taking place in the level, and then you can use the submenus to kind of whittle down exactly what it is you're trying to affect. So, for example, if you know that you're going to create some sort of an action that affects sound in your level, well, you can jump right down to the sound submenu and you'll see what's available. So, to me, that can make things a little bit easier. You can search for any of the sequence objects that are already inside Kismet you may have put out by using the search tool. And you can search through the comments, which we'll talk about a little later. You can search through variables, all sorts of different things you can search for. This will become more useful as you start to make very complicated Kismet sequences. Actually, technically speaking, the stuff that we're going to create probably won't really require the search window that much. But as you build something that's really vast, you may find that using this can make it a lot easier to find what it is you need to change. Now, next to this, we have the update list. This is really only going to be useful as newer versions of UDK come out and certain nodes that may be in your sequence become obsolete. Anything that needs to be updated to a newer version will appear in this list. That's really all there is to it. Now, also, just as a side note to anybody watching this video, you may hear me drop the term node as I go through these videos. That's kind of a habit, partially because I'm a Maya person, but also because conceptually, that's what these sequence objects are. They are nodes that are going to get connected together, and each one of these sequence objects kind of has its own functionality. They're like little black boxes that you're going to wire together. It becomes very much like wiring together circuits. Okay, that's enough of a quick introduction to Kismet. Actually the Kismet editor, because now it's finally time for us to start using it. I just wanted to make sure everybody got a little piece of that. Now, let's go ahead and delete out these junk nodes. And we have our open new window button is the last thing. All this is going to do is open another copy of the Kismet window if you want to have multiple ones open. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Now, I already have a trigger here inside our view. Here inside Kismet, I can right-click, and if I have that trigger selected, I can choose New Event using trigger 0. If you don't have it selected, jump back into your level real quick, select it, and come back in here. Now let's click Used. This event would be useful if we wanted the player to walk up and actually hit the E key to open the gate. Like, you're kind of suggesting that in the real world, the player would have to go up and slide the gate open. That's not necessarily what we want to do, but if you wanted to set it up that way, you could by creating a use trigger. I'm going to delete this, right-click again, and we'll come down to a simple touch. This is like a proximity trigger. Once the player gets within that collision radius that we set up, then suddenly they're going to be able to see this. This event will take place. I think that's the easiest way to put that. All right, so a couple of things you need to know right off the bat. Every event that you create has a max trigger count. This may very well be the most important property in any event that you build. This, by default, in most events is going to be set to 1, meaning that this trigger, this touch event, will only fire once. Now, if you think about that, what that means is our gate will only open, but it'll never close. And we'll never be able to open it again. So, really, it's just going to slide open once, and that's the end of it. Now, if that's the kind of behavior you're looking for, cool. Leave it right here at 1. I'm going to set it down to 0, which is the equivalent of setting it to infinity. That means the door can open and then close and then open and close, and it'll just continue that indefinitely. Now, the player has walked into our collision radius, and therefore they have touched something. What are we going to have happen? Well, we need to play an animation. Anytime you're animating an object inside of UDK, you need to be reaching for a matinee. Now, once again, this is a network that was already discussed in our simple level. So what I'm going to do is just kind of set this up fairly quickly. We're going to go from our touched output over to the play of our matinee. And I need to double-click my matinee to set this up. So I'm going to make sure that I select my gate, and then here inside matinee, I'm going to right-click and create a new empty group here inside the group track list. We got to give this guy a name, so let's call it Sliding Gate. And click OK. Now, we've got to give this a motion track or a movement track as well. So let's right-click and choose New Movement Track. And it already comes in with a keyframe, which is excellent because that first keyframe is established at whatever the default position was. So technically, we've already got a keyframe in place, which is setting our gate to this position. I'm going to move my time slider, which is the little black bar down here, over to 1 second, and press Enter. Now, if I click on that key, it says Adjust Key 1. I'll just go ahead and slide the gate to its open position, and now we have animation. So if I hit stop and play, boom, there's our gate. It's opening up. It really is that easy. Now, I'm going to take my overall length of the animation, designated by the little red triangular flag you see over here in the lower right-hand corner of the screen, and I'll pull this back to 1 second. So that's it. That's really all we're going to do. So now let's go ahead and close Matinee. Matinee is not really the focus of this lesson, so I didn't want to spend a lot of time in it. But Matinee is in itself integrated into Kismet. It is a Kismet sequence object. So it's just, in a way, you could think of it as another node or another sequence object that you need to know how to use. So I don't mind really touching on it a bit. Now, when we touch, we're going to play that so that it opens up. Let's set it up so that when we untouch, or when we leave that collision radius, we can click on reverse, which will play the animation backwards. And really, that should open and close the gate. Let's go ahead and give it a quick test. So I'll right-click, choose play from here. We open, we close. We open, we close. Very simple. Now, if we want to do something like some sound effects, this is a little bit outside the scope, but I'll mention it, I'll point it out to you, and if you want to add it in on your own, I'll just kind of show you where to look. If you come under the properties of our gate and expand Interp Actor, here's some things that I'm going to just show you and you can play with. We've got open sound, opened sound, an opening ambient sound, as well as a closed sound, and a closing ambient sound. Try plugging some sound cues in here and see what you get. Now, again, that's more about movers, and there's an entire section of videos specifically on moving objects with Matinee, and we're going to move several different types of objects, and we're going to play with that sort of stuff then. I just thought I'd bring it up. So our very first Kismet sequence is actually set up. All we're doing is opening up a door. That is going to wrap things up for this video, so go ahead and save your level at this point, and then we'll move forward.